Welcome to Tech Talk with R&E Automated. I'm your host, Jordan Dieterle. Join us as we dive into the world of automation and manufacturing, bringing you expert insights from industrial professionals and business leaders. Whether you're a business owner, engineer, or simply passionate about technology, this podcast is your go-to source for the latest trends and innovations in the field. Welcome, everybody, to Tech Talk with R&E Automated. I'm your host, Jordan Dieterle. Today here I have Philip Sessions from BMW and Sessions Speaking. Welcome, Philip.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jordan.
That's glad you could join. And today here we're going to talk on communication in the workplace and how Philip has built a whole career on helping companies and individuals communicate, to better their career and to help gain more communication skills between individuals and companies. We're looking forward to this. Philip, do you want to give me an idea and our audience an idea of like what you do to help with communication?
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about that. So, what I specifically help with is helping teams as well as leaders learn how to communicate more effectively. And so, what that looks like is figuring out what the strategy is, what's your end goal with a presentation, with a speech, just any conversation that you're trying to have with somebody, and figure out that end goal. And then we reverse engineer that so we can make sure that we're very direct, but in a positive manner, of course, and be able to get our message across clearly and concisely. And within corporations, within dealing with, if you're an engineer, try to talk to management or management to engineers, there's a lot of miscommunication because we don't understand each other. So that's a lot of what I talk about as a strategy. Let's put ourselves in that person's shoes and then be able to speak to them and share stories that are relatable to them as well as ourselves and everything. And so that's a lot of what I go through, because the number one thing that I see within corporations, within manufacturing environments, is that communication lacks in some way, shape, or form. And it's typically because we want to talk to somebody the way that we think would be effective, which is something that we're comfortable with. We know how to talk to ourselves, but we need to focus on how we talk to others, because the way that I want to be loved is not the same way my wife wants to be loved. So if I show her love in the way that I want to be loved, she'll see it, she'll feel like a little bit, but if I show her the love the way that she wants to be shown it, she's going to feel so much more love there. So same thing for us with communications. We'll kind of get it, but you get it a lot more when somebody communicates to you the way that you want to be communicated to versus the way they want to be communicated to.
Yeah. So what would be like other ways that people would want to be communicated to? Like, I guess give an example of that.
So engineers typically want to have a ton of details. So if you're an engineer speaking to another engineer, going into detail is going to be great, because as an engineer myself, we want to know the nuts and bolts of everything. How in the world does it work? What did you do to fix the problem? Stuff like that. But when you're talking to management, while having the details may be helpful for them to go up to senior management to speak about the topic in a little bit of detail, a lot of times it's over their head and it's really too much information, because they don't need to know everything. They just need to know the rough draft of what it was that you did in order to fix the problem. So identify the problem, talk about a couple of things that you did to fix the problem, and really kind of like next steps or something. So as the engineer to management, you're learning to speak to them with less detail and more about the big picture. And management to engineers, you want to give some more details, try and go into more detail, because a lot of times they don't know the big picture. And so that's how I would say I see what happens is engineers are all about the details, and they do that with engineers, they do that with managers, they do that with non-engineers, and only the engineers will get the detail and love the detail. The other two parties won't at all. So you have to go communicate with that party the way they want and need to be communicated to.
Yeah, well, I mean, even me as an engineer, right? I definitely love the details, for like a project. But when it comes to like sales and like talking to management or a customer that is looking for like less detail, it's like, all right, I gotta dial it back to make sure that, hey, I say I'm not giving them too much information, because sometimes it's like it's just over their head, right? And they're like, I don't need that, right? I just need, is it working? Is it running? Or even in a manufacturing process, right? That's what they
Yeah,
want to know. And what do we need to do next? That is
exactly.
definitely a big key. What do we need to do next is like seems to be the big answer. But yeah, I say that no, that makes total sense. Where have you experienced this, like at BMW and everything? Like when in I mean, I think you said you used to work for SAR Automation as well.
Yeah, so that was actually the example I was going to go with. So before getting on at BMW, with SAR, I was a controls engineer for them. So I was doing programming of PLCs. I was leading both PLC and robot programmers. And there was a situation where we had BMW, we had me at SAR, and we had other suppliers that were going in and programming the lines. And there was this with IPSL. If anybody knows about BMW, basically it's a type steering within uh, within BMW. And so the part basically has a unique ID, and you can't just take that unique ID and then slap it on another part. That just doesn't work that way. And there's only so many. So let's say you've used 10 unique IDs and you only have 10. It's not like you can just say, oh, I want an 11th and pull it out of thin air. But when we were there, BMW was trying to say that, like, hey, you can't just do this. And I understood it, but the other programmers, while the BMW engineers were programmers and we had other programmers, so they theoretically speak the same language, they weren't getting it. And so I ended up being a middle person in this situation where I'm like, okay, BMW, you're saying this, right? And like, yes. And I'm like, okay. And so you line builder, so programmer, you're saying this, right? Like, yes. And this, the way you're wanting to do it can't happen because you just can't theoretically just build a bunch of parts because there's only so many part numbers. And they're like, and BMW is like, yeah. And the programmers were like, oh, okay, that makes sense now. But I had to really break it down into layman's terms. So even though that both of them were programmers and they could theoretically speak the same language, sometimes we still can't speak it completely. And so you really have to break down as much as possible and make things as simple as possible instead of saying super high level. Just like I talked about IPSL. If I just said IPSL, this acronym, you'd be like, what in the world? But when I said like type data, type steering, that made a little bit more sense. And of course, we could go into more detail. Depending on who we're talking to, we may need to, like management, we'd probably talk about that a little bit more, but that's obviously for a different conversation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just one example.
Yeah, so basically you took the engineering level or the engineering description and basically dialed it down to, hey, say I'm talking to an ordinary person, even though they're programmers, and said, all right, we need to, like, they want the detail, but I'm going to take this and make it so that they both can understand it in a, let's say a layman's term of, a child level, right? It's saying
Yeah.
not anything against them, but it just made it easier for both sides to understand, okay, this is what we're looking for, is a to basically get to an end result, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So trying to find a common ground that they both can understand, or at least even if it was I had to talk a little bit different to this party over here and then come back and verify with this other party. And that was a little bit different situation because I was kind of the middle person that understood it, but both parties couldn't understand what each other were trying to say and everything. And so I've had it on the other side where I've been the person that's trying to communicate something, and I have to really think about, why are they not getting this? And is it because I'm going into too much detail, or is it because I'm not giving all the background information? And that's typically what happens for all of us, whether management, non-management, engineer, non-engineer. We struggle with the fact that we have all this background information in our head, so it all makes sense, and we're not giving enough information. And so it also comes to the fact that you need to just give more information because what seems very elementary or very basic for you, because you're in the weeds, you're in the trenches of the project, you have to share that information with somebody that's not in those same weeds. It's not dealing with that project at the same level as you for them to have that background to even have a chance of having an understanding of it. It's kind of like an inside joke. For
Mhm.
you, if you and I have an inside joke and we say something real quick, like, oh, that's funny, or like we'll laugh, but somebody else on the outside like, what in the world? Like that makes absolutely no sense at all. But until you finally tell them this is why it's a funny inside joke, and then like, oh, and now they get it. So
Yep.
same thing with our communication. A lot of times we try and tell a quote unquote inside joke, but we hadn't told anybody what the joke actually means. So it's like, okay, so yeah, telling a bad joke.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's and then obviously the manager doesn't management, or it's a somebody that is a was not involved with the project would not understand. They would not think anything like that was funny or not get what
Yeah,
you're looking for. But say once you sit down and explain it to them in their terms or what they're wanting to hear, you're getting an answer or response that you want to see from them. Correct?
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Or another
No.
another good example for you is like, hey, we got $100,000 change order, and so we need to get this approved. And you're going to management saying, hey, we got $100,000 change order. We need to get that approved. Well, they're not just going to approve it. It doesn't matter how big the company is, whether $100,000 is like a dollar or if it's like $100,000. And they're not going to approve it until you give them some details, even though in your mind, like, hey, I just need this approved now. It makes sense. Well, we justified it on my end, but you have to let the person approving it know what the justification is. Now you don't have to go into every single detail, but you need to give them enough details for them to understand why you need an extra $100,000.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, just say it's like, hey, we're gonna get 0.25 or half a job per hour more. Like that's just
Yeah,
justifiable for them. Like you give that good of detail right there to them. That's worth it because they say that could be another half a part every hour. Well, you add that up over the whole entire day, it could be a significant amount of parts that they're making that, hey, say over a whole week we paid that $100,000 back to ourselves. Correct.
exactly. And that's a great way to justify that, like showing that this is the return on an investment. Another one that's it's a different situation. So return on investment is very easy, but hey, we need to do this. Otherwise, we're going to have some serious safety issues. So that's a different topic, but still a very prominent reason why you need that change. But you need to go in there, explain not just what you need, but why you need it, and really justify that. Especially if you're going to management with that, because they've got to go answer to somebody. And it doesn't matter what the cost. I mean, it could be $100 that you need. Now you're not going to have as much justification because it's $100 versus 100,000, but still
Mhm.
you need to have justification no matter what kind of money that you're trying to spend is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that seems to be, I think, across most or almost every organization is say they're going to want, justification or, an answer of why say we're spending this to say to, go along or, complete this project or whatnot. I say same thing with safety. And that could be a huge thing too. I mean, obviously what happens is say with, like as like just say safety is say is that a different conversation than is say a budgetary one is say or does it kind of relay the same because you say I've always seen it where it's like no sometimes safety just takes like super high priority and they're way more open to spending that money when it needs to be done compared to a budgetary one where it's like okay we can take our time and say do you experience that as say in the high or importance of those is say compared to the other.
It depends. It should. I believe safety should take higher priority than budget or anything like that. But it really depends on the situation. Typically, what I see is if there's a safety issue that has happened, let's say somebody loses a finger or something like that, you've got the money like that. There's no questions asked. It gets escalated through all the chains of approval very quickly. But if it's hey, we're trying to prevent this, we're trying to prevent shoulder injuries, let's say, and so we want to put this new system in, that will typically take a little bit longer. So it's more if it's a prevention. I've noticed that it tends to take longer. It's still something that's a priority and it should be from management, but sometimes when it's a preventative thing, it takes a lot longer than a reactive thing because then you're still trying to get the money and justify it, which really goes back to the budgeting there. So it really kind of depends on that situation. Then it also depends on management because there are some managers that harp on safety a lot more than other managers do. I think across the board, we all want to be safe. We want to make sure that everybody comes to work and they leave exactly the same as they were.
Yeah,
but at the
definitely.
same time, there's there's other things that sometimes they want to focus on. They're more concerned about, let's say, production, which is a reality for us. And so really trying to justify that, that's where that the communication comes in there. So when it's a reactive thing, it's very easy to justify, hey, somebody just lost their finger because we didn't have this safety function in here, so we need to add that. Okay, boom, right away, get it. But hey, we could have a shoulder injury that could happen because of this. Based on track records, it could cost us about this much if we have this many shoulder injuries. And we're really kind of talking theoretical. And so you're
Mhm.
really having to push, like, what kind of proactive cost savings could we have here if we handle this now? And so you're really talking about something that hasn't been actualized. So the ROI is a lot different when you look at that, or the return on that investment is a lot different because you're doing more preventative versus reactive. And as humans, we tend to work better, or we tend to focus more on reaction versus being proactive on things. And so that's something that's always just going to be something harder to sell, because it's something that's, oh, it's in the future, it hasn't happened yet, we're not too worried about it, versus, oh, this has already happened, we've got to fix it now,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, no. So I heard you say like that you have like just say you have a manager that is more safety oriented and a manager just that is more production oriented, right?
Mhm.
So how do you communicate differently between those two managers is say to get the same result that you're looking for? Like what would you do, I guess, to say for both of those? Obviously, just say that there's a scenario that you're looking to accomplish, whether it be a safety or just a capital budget. Is say how would you communicate between? Are they the same when you're communicating when you want an end result, or is it a little different? Do you take everybody a little different? Obviously, it could be a production, it could be management, it could be an engineer. Say, but how would you take those two individuals differently or speak to those two individuals differently?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So I want to split this up into two things. So one, we're talking on an individual basis, and
Hmm.
then the other side, we're going to talk where they're both in the same room, because we have these scenarios happen all the time when we're having to present on a topic. So on a individual basis, the guy that's focused on, or the person that's focused on safety, and that's their number one concern, I would talk directly to that. Hey, the reason why we want to put this in the system in is because it's going to help prevent these costs, is going to help prevent these injuries here, and just talk to that, and they'll typically be bought in. How I would shift that a little bit with the person that is focused more on production is I would talk about how, if we don't do this, yes, we're going to have an impact monetarily wise on a safety, ergonomics, and all of that jazz. But I would also mention about how production will be decreased, because now when that person goes out for a shoulder injury, now we have to bring somebody else in who isn't as experienced in this area to be able to load parts, let's say, or whatever that is, because this other person is out that has the experience. So now your production is possibly going to be impacted, because now you have somebody who has less skill doing the same job as somebody with more skill, because you decided you didn't, if you decide you don't want to implement this system. Now, if we are together, they're both together, and I'm trying to present to them, I would probably go with the second scenario, talk to the person that needs more details. The other person is going to be bought in very quickly, but they'll like to hear that additional information. So I would focus on the person that you're going to need more of that buy-in in this situation. Overall, I would try and focus on who's going to be the biggest influence in a group if we take this out a little bit. So who's going to be the biggest influence in the group, because you can only present to the group and impact certain people. So really focusing in on one person, whoever that big key influencer within the group of managers that you're presenting to, allow the manager that you're presenting to and talking directly to influence the other ones, because they have more rapport with the managers than you do. So kind of give you three different situations how I would handle those individually, in a group, and then if it's a larger group, a little bit more generic there.
Yeah, basically you're looking to get the each individual's buy-in, and then obviously when you're going to a group, you're looking at the one that would be more influential to the problem or issue at the time. So if it was safety related, you'd probably be going to the safety, say manager, or
Mhm.
say somebody like that. Say if it was production related, or say a cost savings related, you might be going to the production manager and saying, hey, this is where I think we need to do this. So you're basically you're deciding on who is more important to approach the problem with is say at the current time or whatever issue we're trying to resolve, correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like sales. If I'm trying to go with your like automated equipment that you build, you bring programmers in and stuff like that. If I try and go to the gym and sell your services, like that just makes no sense. Like they're never going to buy your services because, I mean, unless if we're, I mean,
I don't know, I
20
met some people at the
whatever.
gym first.
Yeah, yeah, that maybe they want to automate some stuff. Well, I'm talking about like in the gym itself, like you're talking
Yeah.
to the gym owner, like they're not going to buy that. So it doesn't make sense to talk to them about some automated equipment and bringing in your services to bring programmers and stuff like that. But if I go to a manufacturing manager, a production manager, that's going to make more sense. So you want to talk to the person that it makes most sense for. So like you mentioned with the production manager, talking about production topics, safety manager, talking about safety topics. Worst case scenario, like one thing that you could look at is like what's important to the VP or the CEO, whoever's in that room, the highest up, typically they'll have the most influence just by default. But that's not always the case. Sometimes there's somebody else that doesn't have the highest title in the room that has the most influence. So you kind of fill that out as you go in the room, kind of see how people are interacting. How if there's a lot of times people will like look towards somebody for that cue, like, oh, what do you think? Every time you bring up a decision, you'll kind of see them look towards somebody, and that's typically the person that has the most influence, and that's not always the person with the highest title or the biggest title. So kind of keep those cues in mind as you're presenting on topics too, to try and get their buy-in. Are they leaning in? Are they really looking at you? Or are they deciding to look at their phone? If they're not looking at their phone, I mean, if they're looking at their phone, they're not really bought in. They don't really care about the topic. But if they're leaning in, if they're really paying attention, that probably means that they care about that topic. So that's a way that you can figure out who's the person that's kind of bought in, and you can kind of keep dialing in to them to get their buy-in and the influence of them later on when you're outside of that meeting.
Yeah, it's like their body movements is say you're
Mm-hmm.
basically paying attention to what they're doing or what their body movements are. If they're leaning in, they're interested. I've always been told, hey, if they're like scratching their nose, to say, or they're like just doing this, looking off into space, like they're not really interested in what you're having to say, right? It's that's just the way. That's the I mean that's sales 101 is if you're paying attention to the individual and they're leaning in or wanting to hear what you're having to say or like paying attention or even taking notes. Sometimes they say sometimes people think, oh, they're just texting, but sometimes they might be taking notes. Hey,
Yeah.
it's a question to just ask them, hey, what are you writing down to say for this or or if they say, well, I'm not, they say obviously they might not be interested, right? But it depends on the topic that you're really trying to approach or communicate to them, right?
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
that's not always 100% either, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I just scratched my nose. I was thinking about that. I'm
Yeah.
like, man, not, now, of course, you're saying scratch my nose. I've got an itch on my nose.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I know.
But
It's that's
yeah,
just like the common like that's one of the common things that I've always like heard. And I'm like, I don't know, I scratch my nose a lot when it like, I'm trying to like do something or whatever.
yeah,
So
yeah. But
yeah.
I mean, it's a good sign for sure. If it keeps happening, that's probably a good indicator
Yeah, like if
that
we're just
you're
if
not
we're sitting here like doing this, it's like, okay, hurry up, finish. No, no, not like anything like that, right? But yeah,
yeah.
it would be you definitely notice is say, or you could see that, right? And
Hmm.
that definitely has a lot to do with like communication between people because everybody's movements are different, and you can notice that.
Hmm.
So no, that's really good. I say I like that that analogy is say to say, hey, it's not just words. It's always it could be their body movement. It could be the way that they act. What about like emotions? Like if somebody like gets elevated with their emotions, so they're angry or they're sad or whatever they say might happen at that scenario. How would that be dealt with? They say with communication. They say what is another way that you could navigate that to help say this situation.
So if they get angry, just staying calm. A lot of times when our emotions get high, our logic drops. So the emotions will increase, the logical side of your mind will decrease. So you as the presenter or you as the person that hopefully isn't angry yet, the best thing you can do is really just stay calm. It's in a situation I can think of, and this is like a silly example, but like if somebody's sitting there calling you names, rather than you be like, oh, no, you suck too, like, and just sitting there calling them names back. If you're just like, yeah, I'm really not that great. Oh, yeah, I am ugly, and you just kind of agree with them, eventually they're going to run out of like nasty things to say about you. And
Yeah,
so it's the
true.
same thing that happens when you stay calm and somebody's angry. They run out of steam. They're like, well, okay, I'm the only one getting angry. Like, well, this is awkward now because like I'm getting super angry and I look childish. But if y'all are both angry now, it's like, oh, it's on. We're gonna fight and everything. So really, just staying calm. And so if somebody's getting sad, trying to be more upbeat, more positive, maybe not like ultra positive. And a very extreme example, like somebody's very sad because their dog passed or a family member passed, and you're like, oh, that's great. Like, no, that's a terrible way to say it. But you don't need to start crying with them. You just be like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But you're calm. You're kind of centered. You're not happy. You're not sad. You have empathy for them. So really, either situation, like really just trying to stay calm with that when the emotions get to extremes is going to be the best way to help bring people back. Because a lot of times, especially when we're trying to get people to make decisions, and typically what happens in the manufacturing environment is that everybody gets angry. And so when they're getting angry, it's like a child because they want their way. They don't like what's being said. And so they're going to do something to distract you so that way you get side railed and then no decision is actually made. So when you can stay calm, it makes you look more professional and it allows the conversation to continue because y'all haven't both escalated and then whatever could happen from that situation. So just stay calm, try and stay even tempered overall, no matter which direction somebody's emotions go.
Yeah, yeah. You said something there that I really like, and it's like, a lot of people just want to get their way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the manufacturing space, they're like, no, this is the only way it's going to work, and it's like, okay, if you think that, I say, well, let me ask you this, and I did this personally a lot. I say, obviously, being in the engineering side, was I would ask a different question. Well, why do you think that is? Or
Mm.
instead of like, how do you think that? I say they can give one word answer. I would make them give me an explanation
Yeah.
because then they know and they might be elevated. And then it's like, I'll ask that question and say, well, they say giving positive feedback. Yeah, that's a really good way. They say, what do you think of it this way? Or giving a different scenario and say, make them think about it to give me a different answer, right? Because they say at the end of the day, we've like, hey, I've tried that. It doesn't work. I'm not just going to come out and tell them that when they're angry, right? It just wouldn't benefit me if that's the case. Same thing is say, even if I was wrong, I'm open to hearing, well, what do you find your solution to be? But I'm not going to try to get angry for them because if they do find a better solution, I want to solve the problem, especially in manufacturing. That's what we're here for. We're solving people's problems
Yeah.
and building, other things to help solve manufacturing, American manufacturing problems. And, that's the idea of it. So, but you need a ton of people that can communicate to complete this.
Yes,
Correct.
exactly. Exactly. In all projects, I find the number one problem is that we do not communicate in
Yes.
some way, shape, or form. Maybe we're saying words, maybe we're sending emails, but the information was not transferred properly. And so all problems, the root cause is really lack of communication or poor communication.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Philip, I appreciate you taking the time today. To talk with us on Tech Talk with R&E Automated. Is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners? To basically end this session here, and I'll. If you guys want to reach out to Philip, you can reach out to him. It's his name's Philip Sessions, and please connect with him on LinkedIn. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Philip?
Yeah, I would say most people like, how in the world do I get started with speaking? The easiest way I found is this beautiful thing called a phone where you've got a camera on it and just record yourself. Decide on a topic you're going to talk about and just continue to record yourself, different topics, whatever. But you have to get repetition in. No matter what we do in life, we typically are not good at it the first time. And so just get some repetition in and do that. And then the flip side, if you've already been kind of speaking a little bit and you want to get better at speaking, really think about one, your audience, who is your audience you're speaking to, and two, what is the outcome that you want from that presentation, from that conversation? Because when we can think about our end in mind, it's a lot easier to have an effective conversation or presentation, much like going somewhere. If we have a destination of where we're going, we're going to know that we actually made it there and exactly where our intention to go is. But if we just say, I just want to go travel somewhere, okay, well, what does that mean? And you might have in your mind like Texas, or somebody else might think Florida just because we want to go on vacation. But
Mhm.
until you decide what that end destination is, you don't know if you've really made it to where you want it to go vacation at. So same thing with our conversation. So really having the end in mind and then knowing who your audience is are going to be the two best things that you can do to help yourself have more effective communications, whether it be presentations, one-on-one conversations, whatever that looks like. And then just go do videos, continue to take action, and you will get better over time.
Yes, I say I definitely agree with that. I say Philip has been a big push to say for me to kind of grow what I'm doing. I never was on video a lot. I feel a lot better from 6 months ago when I started this. So
Yes,
yes, it
I'm
is. It
loving it,
is
man.
good.
I'm
Yeah.
loving the videos that you're doing.
Yeah, it's coming along, and I'm slowly. I've seen that same process. What you're saying is you start building that confidence up, and I always take this. You got to get uncomfortable being uncomfortable, right? They say when you're comfortable, is say you're okay doing something repetitive, you're fine. But when you're uncomfortable, you got to get comfortable. They say to
Yeah.
get what you want to do done. They say, and then as you continuously do it and repeat it, you'll be comfortable being uncomfortable. So I know that was a lot of like uncomfortables, but it was still like that's the idea of what I've been looking at is like I gotta get comfortable doing this. They say because if I don't, they say it won't be successful. It won't grow the way I want it to, and what I'm looking to do, and benefit others as well. So
Yeah, you're exactly right. Growth happens outside the comfort zone. And so as we get comfortable with something, that means we've grown into that, much like lifting weights. At
yeah,
first, 135 pounds on bench seems like a lot, but after a while, you get comfortable with that because your muscles have grown and adapted to it. And now that's a comfortable weight. Because if you want to grow, you got to add more weight. It's the same thing with us, whatever we're trying to go after. So if you want your communication to get better, you got to start communicating more. Get uncomfortable with that. Have uncomfortable conversations, even if they're small ones. And slowly build up that communication muscle, grow it. So get outside of the comfort zone, like you're saying.
yes. Perfect. Well, if anybody wants to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Jordan Dieterle. You're welcome to look up session speaking. And Philip is also a project manager at BMW, working on communication. Yeah, Philip is that about? Is that anything else you wanted to add or?
Yeah, so it's speaking sessions, by the way.
Oh,
I know,
speaking
a little
sessions.
confusing.
Okay.
It's all a
Yeah,
wordplay
sorry.
and all this stuff. But you're good, man. You're
Speaking
good.
sessions. Sorry, my bad. Yeah,
You're good.
I messed that one up.
But no,
But
that's
yeah,
it. I appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, perfect. Well, I appreciate everybody. I'm your host, Jordan Dieterle. I'm signing off.